Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in one more interview of Dojo Live, the future, those creating it. And speaking of the future, joining us today in one more interview of Dojo Live, the future. Oh, let me get that fixed.
Never a dull moment.
There you go. This is one of the beauties of technologies that you can discontinue, right? Okay, well, today here on Dojo Live, I am honored and delighted to have Ruth Yomtoubian, right? Did I pronounce it correctly,
Yeah.
Ruth? Okay, cool. She is, well, she's going to be talking to us about 5 key practices to develop your foresight. Ruth, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here. And I'm particularly delighted because it's the first in-person interview that we do here on Dojo Live at Microsoft. So
Great.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And of course, as ever, joining us also from Los Angeles, my fellow teammate and co-host, Tulio Siragusa. Hi, Tulio.
Hey, great to be here today. I'm looking forward to today's show and today's conversation with Ruth right there live at Mexico City.
Absolutely. Okay, Tulio and Ruth, I would like to start off by, can you tell us a little bit about you and then tell us about your company, which is BeforeAlpha, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that, Ruth. Let's start with that.
Yeah. So I'm what you call an innovator, which I know is a very broad term, and part of why we're here today is we're going to talk about what it really takes to work on the future, because I'm a big believer that not everyone is cut out to work on the future, but for those who are not, we're going to talk about how we can do that. What I do day to day is I work with companies, big and small. I do a bit of coaching, some workshops, and really part of my goal at BeforeAlpha is to fight faux innovation. It's a big trend right now. All companies are setting up shops in Silicon Valley and around the world to tap into this kind of amorphous, hard to define thing. But what we know about it is that we need foresight. We need the ability to navigate the future if we're going to work on it. So that's something that I help companies do through a few workshops we have around trend mapping, and around evaluating your innovation operations and strategy to make sure that you're coming in with a really strong motive for innovation. One thing we just talked about earlier is that many times companies will open up doors and say, let's put no structure around this and hope the magic happens. Or the other way where they're so afraid of failing and they want to ensure the success going forward that they overly engineer their innovation initiative. And so what we're going to talk about here is ways that we can put the right amount of structure and the right people in place so that you can successfully move towards the future, no matter what the technology changes, no matter what that cultural change is.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and I appreciate it. Okay. Speaking of foresight, I understand that you're going to be talking to us about 5 key practices, right, to develop your foresight.
Yeah.
So why did you choose this particular topic?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on talking very high level about technologies emerging that are going to be affecting our day-to-day work. But there's not enough discussion around the mechanics of how do you do that? How do you understand how AI is going to impact your company? How do you understand your role in the new entertainment landscape? And so in working on the future myself, having run a number of AT&T's innovation programs and now worked with a number of companies inside and outside Silicon Valley and around the world, that's why I'm here in Mexico today, is that we really need to think about how to create value in an ambiguous environment. So when you're looking at the future and saying, what's my role in the entertainment landscape or what's my role in AI, you need to be able to create value in these ambiguous environments. And there's nothing more ambiguous than the task of defining the future for your organization or for an industry. So that's the first question. Okay, so Tulio, are you going to keep track now of how you answer all these questions?
Well, I'm like ready to go through the workshop with you. Walk us through it because we're very curious to see how you apply this.
Okay, so let me just step back for a second.
Absolutely.
The future is uncertain, right? We can all agree.
Yeah.
But to hedge that uncertainty, you need to have the right people in place.
Right.
And you need to enable them with the right strategies, the right tactics, the right mechanisms to respond. Because while right now AI is, undoubtedly the most important technology, there are new cultural trends that are emerging, and whether you are in the strategy team or the marketing team or the sales team, you can hedge that uncertainty by having the right people in the right place and having the right strategies,
right,
and supporting it. All right. So with that, number one, do you know how to create value in an ambiguous environment? So what that means is, are you able to kind of forge the path? Are you able to feel the walls to get yourself into the right place? And a lot of what this really means is calibrating. So instead of working for 2 years on developing a product or creating something for a customer and then just throwing it a big package over the fence, do you know how to prototype and kind of take small shots and put things out there and get feedback from your users, your customers, those who could most benefit from that innovation, from that product, from that service, and get that feedback and build that into your path to create value in this ambiguous environment? So what do you think?
So that's a great question. And I think most people will say, at least in the startup world, that they probably tap into their own knowledge base or experience or trends they've seen. Some will build some value canvases using various tools. Some will validate with potential customers. That's the sort of what I call the traditional approach to trying to validate opportunity when it's ambiguous. But I'm more curious to learn, how do you apply that more scientifically, right? Where it's not a gut reaction based on the expert, where anyone can actually apply and use tools to do that. So what are some of the best practices you've seen that work?
Yeah, so I think there's a whole new level of prototyping right now, which is getting to be really interesting. Like before, prototyping meant, let's put a design up, and there's even a term I've heard called pretotype, which is the really like back of the napkin idea.
Whole bunch of post-its all over the place, right? Yeah.
But then thinking about, all right, in the past, we put the prototype together, and who do you take it to? The executive of the company. And they're the decision makers. In the past, it has been command and control. Nothing can move forward without the executive team reviewing this prototype and giving them the go-ahead. But the executive of the company is not necessarily the person that has the answer. They're not even necessarily the user of the product. There's no guarantee of success when you put that in front of the executive of the company. And that's the way we've been doing it for a long, long time. But now you're seeing companies do things like wear tests. Wear tests are where you give, especially in the retail environment, this is becoming popular. You give the product to a user, you ask them to, and let's just say it's active wear. You ask them to wear it and then give feedback. You ask them to keep a journal. Maybe it's something they put in their home, and it's a different level of user feedback and a different level of prototyping. It's an earlier point in the process that you start getting things out to customers and involving them in building the future of your company and your product. You kind of put them into the organizational structure. You put them into your plan, and that's going to guarantee more value at the end and more quickly. So it's a bigger investment up front. It's a little bit more vulnerability for companies to start putting things out earlier. But there's so many ways you can do this with focus groups, wear tests, prototyping, going into the stores, trying to find out what are the other variables in the decision making of a customer, rather than acting in a vacuum, in a silo, as if what you made and is in your hands as the creator goes directly as is to the customer. Right. Which brings me to the next question, is do you go beyond challenging the status quo? Are you someone who's just poking holes, complaining, in other words, just pointing out things that are, maybe wrong? Oh, we're so backwards, we're so behind, look, we're outdated, and just where's that getting you? Do you go beyond challenging the status quo? Do you find out what's on the other side of that wall? As soon as you pass over your strategy and your product, where does it go next? If you change what you're delivering and you put it in the same structure, how can you expect the same results? So you have to go and find out, what is the language in which your customers speak? What's the language in which your salespeople speak, your retail environment? Go find out how to challenge the status quo by learning about the context in which you're delivering this solution.
Ruth, would you say that some of this is also cultural related? So in the first part, I heard you talking about being outside in focus instead of inside out, right? And really putting the customer at the helm, not the executive team. In our culture at Nearsoft, we don't have an executive team. It's not how we're structured. It's team-oriented, it's self-managed. So anyone has the equivalency to bring up an idea, move it forward. How challenging is it for organization, in your opinion, where they're more command and control? Does that generate more of that complaining because people feel disempowered? What do you think needs to change to stop the, hey, here's what's broken, instead of, here's how we can have an opportunity because this is broken. Here's how we can go after something that creates new value because we fix something that is broken. What do you think, in your opinion? What are you seeing?
Yeah, there's something you said that I like latched onto immediately, and it was this idea of maybe people are complaining because they feel disempowered. And I think that's why this question is very key to who can create the future. And if you're a spectator and you're sitting on the sidelines, complaining as an employee, as a customer, as a leader, you're not cut out to work on the future. You don't have that foresight muscle, because the person, the professional, the expert who has that foresight muscle will go and build the experience of finding out what that context is to get their idea through. Go and build the case in full. If they don't have the budget, they'll go and figure out, is there a vendor? Is there some other beneficiary of this idea I have that will support me in it? They won't just rest at, oh, well, this culture doesn't support this idea. Now, there's a difference between a culture that's a little slow and bureaucratic and a toxic culture. I'm a big believer in, if it's a toxic culture, leave before the culture changes you. A toxic culture just changes the individual. An individual, I don't believe, changes that kind of toxicity. But when we're just talking about bureaucracy and things being a bit slow, sometimes those constraints happen for a reason, because you're maybe delivering something that where security is really important, or where you need that kind of consistency as it comes out to customers as an endpoint, depending on what type of technology or solution you're providing. So I think it's really important to recognize that sometimes constraints are there for a reason, and we shouldn't just slash and dash and assume that the quickest, this is too slow. Because when you go and look at that context and you go beyond challenging the status quo, that's how you move more swiftly towards getting your solution out, because you took the time to provide that context to the leadership, to the teams. So, for example, one thing that I created when I was at AT&T, and now I help other companies create, is a futurist report. And futurist reports are sometimes seen as, let's be honest, advertorials in some way to showcase thought leadership. But I think a really important benefit of things like futurist reports and thought leadership is the employees. Employees are the new customers. They have to be bought in. They could be playing on their phone instead of building the future if they wanted to, really. And so we need to be able to equip them with a context of what's coming. And so creating a futurist report that showcases the future of drones or artificial intelligence is one way to start getting employees to ask those questions and to have some understanding, so that when you do put the innovation or the new idea in front of them, they're prepared and ready. So preparing business units is another really important step of going beyond challenging the status quo. Not, oh, everyone else in the company is so behind. Take that extra step and prepare them, and things will happen more swiftly.
I really like what you said. Don't use your structure, your culture as a crutch or an excuse to not create value. I mean, that's a great words of wisdom for individuals who might be in those kinds of environments. Take it upon yourself to be an innovator, to add value and look beyond those limitations, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy otherwise. Okay,
Yeah.
what else?
Yeah, and like I said, I do a bit of coaching, and in that, I meet a lot of really exasperated pioneers. There's no other way to say it. And sometimes innovators have to ask themselves, hey, is this the right place for me to innovate? And that's okay. Maybe it's time to leave. So I think that's a fair question.
So would you say that developing foresight would be, let's put it this way, easier to implement in more modern type of companies like software companies or technology-oriented companies, rather than old school companies like that are led by maybe executives with a different mindset or more conservative mindset? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, I think foresight can be developed anywhere. I think we all have kind of things to play with right in front of us, and exercises that we can do. Whether it's more difficult at a larger company, yeah, probably, because there's more dynamics at play. But I do also think in a startup or an inherently innovative organization, there's still going beyond challenging status quo, because I'll give an example, ad tech. There are a number of ad tech companies that are the same. I'm making it a little black and white, but they're more or less the same. Yep. And if they don't, kind of challenge the status quo around how they showcase their technology or their solution, it's just fading into the background. And so you still need those innovators with foresight to push against the industry and say, like, hey, maybe we have a technology that can be used for something else other than advertisement. That's a big passion of mine. Is we have so much focus and attention around things like ad tech that could be used towards bringing more resources to people that don't have them, or could be utilized geographically in other ways. Not every community of people wants highly personalized products, and there's this whole idea of the evolution of convenience, and we keep going down those paths as sort of like the vanguard of tech, but we should use that in other ways as well. And so someone who might challenge the status quo in those environments might be pressed against questions about what makes the most money, what has the biggest market. And so it also takes someone with foresight to see, other areas that these technologies could be applied to, rather than just the most lucrative areas.
I think part of the problem, Ruth, there's too much focus on building something that becomes fundable. A lot of focus on getting funding, actually creating value that generates revenues. Would you say that some of that is part of the reason why you got a lot of Me Too's in the space? They're not very profitable, actually, but they just keep popping up and generating more funds without actually creating profitable revenue or real value that's differentiated.
Yeah, I think that some of those markets are big enough that there's the luxury of, well, there's enough people that need this widget, or enough organizations that need the widget, so there'll always be more, and I should just jump into that space. And that's okay too. That's okay too. I think it's just knowing where your value is. And so that's something that we talk about in our kind of trend mapping is are you really being innovative in 4 different areas, and the personas that are shifting, like the types of customers you're addressing, and the perspectives that are changing, the values that are changing, and the processes, the way people want to receive their services or products, or the actual product and the experience that they're getting. And so we look at those areas and see where there are some potential shifts that can be addressed or are not being addressed. And so that would be another way you might approach this question. I think also Another framework we have is around why start an innovation program, or why, kind of interchangeable with growth. Why are you taking this on? Is it for promotional value? And that's okay too. Sometimes what happens is the motive is something different, and it's just much easier to put all the attention into promotional value, because right now there's so much noise and it's easy to get messages out. Is it adoption? Are you creating a program around adopting new tools, new approaches, new ways of doing work? Is it educational? Like I was saying about the futurist reports, part of it was promotional, part of it was educational. You need to prepare your employees for the future. Then you would approach that differently. Is it for R&D? Are you trying to tap into partners to develop new products? Is it business development? Are you starting a new program because you genuinely are interested in partnering, and have you created a mechanism? Or is it for sales? Are you creating an innovation program so that all the results go straight to the bottom line, to the sales? So we map this out, and we find that, again, many times, let's say you say you want bottom line, you want all the innovation to immediately go to the bottom line, but you don't put maybe the budget, the permission, the autonomy in that team to go and create the sales themselves. So that's maybe a different conversation, but these are some of the frameworks we work to help people go beyond challenging the status quo and really get like smart and more structured about how they do that. Yeah.
Okay, so we're on number 3, right? We have 2 more.
We're on number 3. I'll go.
Okay, I'm just keeping us on track. So okay, so what's next? I'm loving
this is my favorite. This is my favorite. Do you get in the trenches? So are you doing a Google search from your desk to find out about, the future of AI or agriculture or whatever the topic may be? Or are you actually going out to the farms and understanding how this all really works? So there are 2 experiences for me that really drove this point home and just keep giving the gift back to me of foresight, because I had these in the trenches experiences. One is I lived in New Orleans during a period after Hurricane Katrina, where I worked with small businesses and was also there in business school. And a lot of the projects were about, okay, you have a different population here, you're serving a different community, a different market. We have to go out into the community and see what they need, because these entrepreneurs were running their businesses. And it's one thing to keep operations moving day to day, and it's another thing to write a business plan, to research, to do market research, to get funding, to present a vision, to get backing, to invite new customers to your door. It's a different set of muscles. And so we really had to go out into the trenches of the community and get some of these questions answered. So that's one of the places that I really learned the value of getting in the trenches. The other was at AT&T. I was part of a leadership program that I really credit a lot of big companies with doing, and I hope more do. And I think that there's a lot of potential for these programs to give even more back to the companies that started them. So in this program, I spent a year managing frontline technicians in Oakland and Berkeley, driving an F-150 around, essentially in customers' homes, wearing the brand of the company. And I learned that when you're a frontline employee, and you have the brand of a company, you really are in where the rubber meets the road. You really understand customer perception, and when you're in someone's home, that's golden territory. And so I learned a lot about user behavior. I learned a lot about the dashboard mentality, the DNA of AT&T. And as I went into the innovation center, I did another position in operations for network mobility, which is the cell towers. Every time we had a new idea or solution, I would think, okay, could we give one more test to the technicians to run amongst all the other things they need to think about, or amongst all the other things they're being measured for? Is this incremental, or is this really going to benefit the technicians and the customers? And I would make all of our new team members, graduates, great at schools, so excited to be a part of the innovation team, and say, go spend a day with the technician in their truck, go into customers' home, go see what this company is really about. And now that I've worked with a number of other companies, you'll be surprised at how many leaders never even call their 1-800 phone number, never go through the process of renewal for their product. It's so important. And these are small little things that you can do to get into the trenches and understand the customer experience, understand your employees, like build some empathy around what you're creating and what you're changing and why.
Right.
Sounds like people should watch Undercover Boss. Hey, I kept hearing click, click, click. So if there are questions, Carlos, from the audience, should we take them now? Because we've got about 4 minutes.
Yeah, actually, Tulio, here's the thing. Keep in mind that, let me just reframe this thing. Keep in mind that this is our very first live interview, so it's kind of hard. I'm not keeping track of that right now, but I do encourage the audience, after you watch the video on our website, if you have questions for Ruth, you can either go to Twitter @Dojo Live, or just go to the contact info that's going to be right there on the landing page if you have any questions for Ruth. Because I'm running, both tasks right now. So please bear with us, audience. Bear with us. This is a very first in-person live interview of Dojo Live, as opposed to remotely. So at yourself. So that's hence the reason, Tulio. So please bear with me too.
No problem. Okay, so let's continue to the fifth point.
Okay, so we'll wrap up here. So the fourth, I'll just kind of skip over. Do you believe ideas can come from anywhere? It's not about the number of stamps in your passport. This is how I like to talk about it.
The fourth was the Undercover Boss thing, right?
That was the third. That was the third.
Oh, that was the third. Okay, no, let's not skip the fourth. Let's do all of them.
Okay. So that's really about, do you truly believe ideas can come from anywhere? And it's not about the stamps in your passport. It's really about, are you present? Are you absorbing new ideas? Are you listening to the person on the front line, to the customer? Or are you, well, I only listen to my executive, right? Are you listening to the way that people talk about your product? So this is something that I believe a lot of people have just inherently, maybe in their personality, but I think with intention and thoughtfulness, this is a practice everyone can create. Am I truly believing that ideas can come from anywhere? And with a lot of thought leadership programs, like the one that actually Carlos is going to be a part of with me tomorrow here, we tapped into a diverse group of innovators creating innovation for good in Mexico. And that is really about bringing people into the trenches of this idea of innovation for good and ideas being able to come from anywhere. So that's, I'll just say in brief. And then the fifth one is everyone is a variable in creating the future. And do you know the variable that you play? So do you know yourself, essentially? Do you know yourself, and do you know the variable you play? So if you say yes a lot, no a lot, if you have a tendency to kind of focus on things you like I know a lot of people create innovations for their kids, and they kind of have a tendency to say something will fly or not fly in the new generation based on their own kids' experience. So do you know, are you aware of the biases that you have? Do you know your leadership style? Do you know your communication style? Are you rushing from meeting to meeting? Or do you create space in your day to absorb ideas, to think about things, to get outside the building? So this is about self-awareness and knowing the variable you play in building the future.
I think 4 and 5, it's something I talk about a lot, especially in my new book and in my blogs. What are your thoughts as it relates to self-worth, right? If you're the kind of leader who has high self-worth, you're going to be engaged, you're going to be open, you're going to be listening. You're not needing to validate yourself, by getting everybody to agree with you. That's kind of the sign of a megalomaniac, right? But what role do you think it plays in sort of your own self-worth? In one, your ability to receive information, and two, your ability to contribute, belief in yourself that you actually have something to contribute. And how do organizations address that if they realize that's a problem?
Yeah, I think that's why the question is, do you know yourself? Because I think if you know and realize, and you've taken the time to do the work, as Brene Brown, one of my favorite people on this subject, says, if you take the time to do the work and understand yourself, you'll realize, oh wow, my self-worth is a little low. How can I build that up? How can I put myself in more positions where I can feel the power of myself in a room where I usually don't speak up. Or just taking the time to say, I feel like the people out in this room are in a different reality than myself. And let me take a little time out of my day rather than rushing to my next meeting to think about, why is that? Oh, they saw this as a success and I saw a lot of drawbacks to this. How do I best communicate that I saw a different reality? And in a post-mortem, share that with my team. But I think that starts with knowing yourself, and then you can start working on the self-worth part. But yeah, I think going back to the culture, that sometimes individuals have to overcome a culture that doesn't promote self-worth or promotes a certain kind of self-worth.
Right.
But being aware is an important step.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's always, we're out of time. That always happens when we're having fun. I'm looking forward to touching base with you later today and seeing how we can maybe co-create some interesting things around this topic. Thank you for being with us. And Carlos, if you want to wrap it up.
Sure. Thank you, Tulio, as ever. And the only thing left for me before we wrap up today's session is I would like to make a little announcement about, actually it's about today, because today we have what we call a double whammy. Double whammy means 2 interviews in the same day.
Oh, wow.
Or 2 interviews in the same week, right? But today we have 2 interviews today, and the next one is it's going to happen at 1 p.m. Pacific. And let me announce, our guest. We're going to be having a conversation with Mr. Gilad Salamander. He is the CEO and founder of eClincher. eClincher is a social media management platform. And for that, we're going to have also featuring, for the first time, fellow teammate Aurora Velez from Hermosillo as a co-host. So that's going to happen, remember, at 1 p.m. Pacific. And that's what I have for today, Tulio. And the only thing left for me to do, of course, is thank our guest, Ruth Yomtoubian, for being here with us. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
I'm glad to be the prototype for an in-person interview.
You were indeed the prototype for an in-person interview.
There's great energy here.
Well, at least for the Mexico City one.
Carlos forgets things. We had one in LA, but for Mexico City, it is true.
Oh yeah, for Mexico. No, that's what I said. Mexico City. We had one in Hermosillo with Basil. Remember that?
Right. That's right. And one in LA with Range.
Yeah, and also think Cuauhtemoc, Haman here on the cameras and also the photographs. First, and everyone here at yourself. So again, thank you so much, and see you next time. Keep an eye for our next Dojo Live interview, the future from those creating it. Thank you.